A finished floor surface really makes you feel like you're in the home stretch of building. In this video, we're taking you from start to finish on almost 1,200 square feet of LVP in our garage apartment. Layout, tools, techniques, problems, maybe a 1/4 inch ridge. And we can't forget a few appearances by our best boy, Georgie.
Thank you for all that.
The time has finally come to install our LVP flooring. We chose LVP for several reasons, with the main being that it's easy to install, easy to maintain, and it's waterproof, which is very important for our homesteading lifestyle. The specific LVP we chose is 9 inches wide by 72 inches long. We wanted something that was a bit wider and longer than what you would typically see at a big box store. We purchased so many different samples throughout the flooring decision process and ultimately landed on the one that we will be installing today. It is a nice light oak color, which will keep our space light and airy, and it will also be easy to keep clean.
Now, as you know, every good project starts with a freight delivery. I can't believe this brave FedEx driver took his truck up our driveway, but that made for an easy unload. This stuff is super heavy, so really glad to have the skid steer to save us from unloading one box at a time.
In preparation for this project, we obviously watched a lot of YouTube, so now we are basically experts and ready to start. We are going to be starting on this wall here, which is eventually going to get a built-in. So with that, we have some flexibility of where we're going to start. But we do want to make sure that when we get to the other wall, which is our dining room wall, that we don't end up with any tiny sliver pieces. So to do that, we laid out 10 pieces of the flooring so that we can figure out an accurate width of each board once they are connected. We didn't want to just use the nominal board width because there could be some inaccuracies in that. The total width of the 10 boards is 87.5 inches. So we divide that by our 10 boards to then get 8 3/4 inches per board. We first thought about the likely depth we would use for our built-in, so we're probably thinking somewhere between 16 to 18 inches because we have a vent here. Then we set this first board at an arbitrary location between 16 and 18, and then used our Bosch laser measurement tool to measure to the wall. The measurement tool reads 244 inches in our case. I'm going to take the width of the 10 boards, which is 87.5 plus the width of each individual board. So we determine that is 8 3/4. Press equal. And then by pressing equal again, it's gonna keep adding that same amount until I get close to 244. The final number I have here is 245 inches, which tells me that on the other wall, we will have about an inch that we have to cut off. Typically, you're starting LVP at a wall with a spacer, and that is what keeps you parallel as you continue forward. In our case, we're leaving a gap with the subfloor exposed. So how we're gonna do this is we're gonna take some scraps that we generate from the first couple of rows, and then we are going to actually drill them into the floor at 244 inches so that we have a parallel line that we are starting at, and then we can work our way towards the dining room wall. A small arm.
One great thing about LVP is how easy it is to make normal crosscuts without generating any dust. Just score the top surface with a good sharp blade, snap it over your knee, or I like to use the edge of the speed square, then cut through the underlayment from the backside.
So we got the first few rows down. Sorry, I'm a little hoarse. I have the flu, so that's why Aline has been doing most of the talking. But we jigsawed around the duct penetrations through the floor, left about a 1/4 inch margin all the way around because we're gonna come back and seal that with some sealant between the metal and the wood just so we're not losing any conditioned air in that gap. And we did 4 rows because we can still shift it around a little bit. It's not so heavy that we can't move it, but it keeps everything nice and straight. Now we need to kind of anchor this so that with all the rest of the rows, when we're using our tapping block, we're not inching this thing back a 1/16 at a time, causing it to shift or get cattywampus. So we're taking a page out of Joel Leftender, I think his name is. He's got a YouTube channel and he's a flooring guy. His recommended technique was, if you have this space up against the wall, to just grab some scrap spacers, put them in here, and then throw a drywall screw down through each of them. Do one at every joint, and we actually only have one joint because these are 6 foot long pieces. So the key though is getting this first row nice and straight. We can shift it as needed. I'll be using this laser tape to go from the edge of this to that wall and keep it at my 244 inch mark. So I know that this first row is parallel to that wall. So we have a nice even base starting off. We're right where we need to be there, 244. Amazing actually how parallel these walls are to one another. Yep, they're pretty much right on. Okay. There's no one more excited for this floor than this guy right here. He's done with rolling on the dusty OSB subfloor. Oh my gosh, your whole head is white. The whole rest of his body's gray too.
I tried using a table saw for rip cuts at first, and that just made too much dust and shards of warm plastic getting flung back in my face. So it didn't take long to realize the jigsaw was the way to go for cutouts and rip cuts. Quick, easy, and I still wore a mask, but the dust was more like heavy flakes instead of fine dust.
One of the trickiest parts of our flooring install is going around all the cabinets. This is a true floating floor, and heavy cabinets or furniture cannot be placed on top of it because it's going to restrict expansion and contraction, and you especially cannot fasten anything through it. So all the cabinets we put in ahead of time on the subfloor. We actually use the easy level system to raise all the cabinets up over a 1/4 inch off the floor so the flooring can slide up underneath. That's also a water protection measure if there's ever a leak or anything, or God forbid one of our sprinkler heads goes off. The cabinets are not sitting directly on the subfloor wicking that moisture up. But with that extra gap, we can slide the flooring underneath the cabinetry where needed. We're gonna be putting toe kick panels on the fronts of the toe kicks. On the sides, I haven't decided yet, but we can either put base molding or scribe molding there. But for now, I wanted to get the flooring slid up underneath so it looks pretty clean and we can decide down the road. I was moving right along here, getting this cabinet run cut out, and I started to think about my second row and was just playing around with some scraps in here. And then I noticed this guy, this seam. Check this out. There is a large hump at the seam in the subfloor. These are butt edges of a 4x8 sheet of subfloor. And of course, when we went and bought all this lumber, it was at the height of the 2021 COVID lumber spike. We did not pay the extra money for Advantex subfloor like we should have, but it was like literally 3 times the cost, so several $1,000 upgrade at that point. So we got the commodity grade OSB subfloor. It does the job, but this is what you're left with. Mind you, I think this only got rained on once during framing, but it was just enough for these butt edges to swell just slightly, and there's, you know, maybe a 1/4 inch like little ridge at the joints. And I've checked some other ones, like this one behind me, and unfortunately, they have more of the same issues. So I think I'm gonna probably have to go through almost every one of these joints in the house and sand them down or somehow level them otherwise. The LVP could ride over this, like it's flexible enough to do it, but you're definitely gonna notice a hump, especially because this is like the main traffic area of the kitchen, in front of the fridge, in front of the stove, in front of the microwave. So you're gonna feel it, and I just wanna get it right. I don't think it's gonna be that terribly difficult to correct, just more work, of course. So this evening I went out and picked up this little number from Harbor Freight, a $40 handheld belt sander with some 50 grit sandpaper, and I'm gonna try sanding down these ridges a little bit. I went through with a punch and a hammer and drove the nails in a little bit further, and then I'm gonna come back through with this with the vacuum on the dust port so we don't make too much dust, because we do have finished cabinetry and stuff around. And if all goes to plan, this will solve our issue. This is my little cardboard dust corral to try to keep everything contained in this little area. And I got my vacuum hooked up to the sander as well, but it easily pulls off so I can vacuum it up as I go. Let's give this a shot. All right, let's check it out. Whoa, that's a beaut. Not absolutely perfect, but so much better than where it was. We can definitely ride over that now, much better. Here's the next one in comparison.
Alex leveled all of the flooring where we can access. There's a couple of spots that we can't get to because our appliances are on top of the floor there, but we're gonna keep on going. We are now working in the kitchen area around the cabinetry. So there are some rip cuts that we have to do to get started. And then once that's done, it should be pretty smooth sailing.
This piece is a little tricky because we got to go around both of these cabinets and that direction into the stove enclosure. So this is going to be like a T-shaped piece. I used a piece of scrap, slid it under the cabinet, and then marked where it comes flush with this rough toe cook here. Again, we'll be putting a panel on this, so the toe cook will come down and cover this. But I scribed a little line right there, and then I'm holding the actual piece that I'm using up to the gap. I'm gonna lock it in with this little, what's left of this little strip right here, and I'm gonna give myself a little bit of leeway on the sides and just do a little mark on each side. Then I'll transfer this mark like that. And now when I connect this line here, this is what I'm gonna cut out, this whole section right there. I'm gonna use my handy dandy scribe bar. I'm just gonna go to the closest one. I'll give it a little bit of extra. Oh shit. We lost our scribe.
I saw that. Wasn't that bad.
Looks pretty good still. Let's give her a check. Should be easy enough to latch onto there. Wind up. Yep, that'll do. So I learned my lesson on the last little alcove that I had to do. I put this down and then had to like try to get the other two back up underneath of it. But if I have the access, for these, I'm just gonna cut these two pieces, latch them all together out here, slide the whole thing in all in one piece. That way I can get it up underneath these cabinets so you don't have to put trim there or anything. Even though it's, you know, the side of a stove, if you do look down, you're gonna see a little flooring gap if you look closely. So that's what I'm gonna do for this one. Just cut the next piece to the same length as this T. Next two pieces, the last one does have to be a rip cut, but we'll just latch them together and do it all out here. Before we get too crazy far going out with this floor, we need to have a reference line to make sure that we're straight and that we're not veering off one way or the other as we go down. We know that this run right here is perfectly straight, parallel to that wall. We've got this anchored, but this is only maybe a quarter of the full run that goes that way. We got cabinets to jog around, and it's tough to anchor all that over there going around all the cabinets. So we just need to continually be checking that our rows are straight to some imaginary reference line in the middle of the floor that does run the whole way, and that's what we're gonna establish right now. So I pulled a tape from that edge out to really just an arbitrary number here. I selected 148 inches. It's a clear path that goes all the way down. I have a mark here. I have a mark about 8 feet away where the other end of my anchored run is, and then we're gonna pull this string all the way over there, make sure that it lines up perfectly with that second mark I made, and then snap it. That's going to extend this line through that mark all the way out here and give us our parallel reference line parallel to that wall. That's the theory anyway. It'll at least get us close, and it'll allow us to keep this whole portion on the left side of the island much straighter, which gives us a good chance of when we go around the island that both halves will meet up and we won't have any issues. So let's go ahead and snap that line. We're just gonna lightly lay it down first. So the idea is you can leave the screw and then you're gonna guide me to tell me where I need to go one way or the other to get it to line up dead on. And then you can snap the string when you think it's right.
Okay, about 1/4 inch.
You almost scared the dog. So from there we're at, yeah, pretty much right there, 148 and 16th or something like that, pretty close. From this row, we are at 60 and 5/16. So we should always be 60 and 5/16 with this row down here. So yeah, we're not 60 and 5/16. We're 1, 2, 3, we're 5/16 that way. So yeah, the whole floor right here needs to come out about 1/4 inch so that it's not kind of curving. We're close, you know, it's surprisingly pretty darn close. We're only having 2 full rows snapped together. But yeah, it's 60 and 5/8. So
So 10/16. This is better. So this is 60 and 7/16. So yeah, it gradually just curves. So you're able to shift this side over it just a little bit, like 1/4 inch is all we needed, 5/16 of an inch. Honestly, all we did was lift up on the last course and just kind of wiggle it and pull with our hands, and it shifted that whole floor over. There's only like 2 full rows there, so there's really not much weight or friction stopping it because it is just a fully floating floor, no fasteners or anything like that. If we had a little bit more room, we could have gotten our floor puller up underneath the drywall behind the stove and could have just tapped it with the mallet, but we couldn't quite get the tool underneath. That's also the way to do it. We are moving and grooving right along, almost on our first aisleway here, and now we have to go around the island. Now, I did have to put some shims underneath this island to keep it steady. We have the easy levelers on these cabinets, but we also have a 500-pound piece of quartz on the top and a 15-inch overhang on the far side for most of the whole length of the island. So with just a 24-inch base cabinet, you know, it can rock a little bit, even with a full stable base. So the easy levelers actually bring the contact points a little bit further inwards, so it makes the rocking motion even worse. So I had to put shims under basically the whole perimeter of it to sturdy it back up to where it was if we just sat the cabinets back on the OSB. But we're gonna have to just use some trim at the base of this. We'll have our toe kick plate just like we will on the rest of the cabinets, but on the side here, rather than just letting the flooring slide under, we'll have to have some base molding or something like that. So compromise on the island, but we wanna have a sturdy island, so we had to do what we needed to do. Same old process though, just mocking each board up, marking our 1/4 inch reveal, and we'll do a quick cutout with the jigsaw, and we should be back off to the races.
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. She's got me singing Christmas tunes.
We have a 1/4 inch thick toe kick plate, which does not leave us a lot of leeway here, so we might have to cheat our tolerances for the expansion on this and just go maybe like an 1/8 inch, just so we don't have to put another piece of 1/4 round on this last piece. Or we could also fur our toe kick plate out just a hair if we need to. That's also an option. Transfer my mark, both ends. And there's our L shape to cut out. Boom, boom.
Will it go?
Yep, she went. How you looking, Captain?
So we are roughly at the halfway point, just made it onto the other side of the island, and now comes the hard part of moving all of these heavy appliances back over onto the flooring so we can continue onwards. With the appliances moved, we are back off to the races after I went through and sanded these additional joints. Getting those joints nice and flat is definitely a labor, not only to do it, but then also to clean up all the dust afterwards, but I think it's gonna be worth it. It's a whole lot easier to fix it now than to deal with a hump in the floor for basically the rest of time. Now Elena's hard at work organizing all the various patterns out. What did you say, there was like 10 patterns or something like that?
I think there's 5 patterns, but some of them are reversed, so then it's harder to tell that they're the same. But I think there's about 5 patterns.
Gotcha. So she's just sort of organizing them by like pattern. And then as we go, she's the master board picker, just trying to make sure that no 2 boards that are the same are right next to each other or even really close to each other. Same thing with the joint spacing. We're paying attention to staggering the joints as randomly as possible, trying not to get sort of the stair-stepping looking pattern as you go up. The tapping block, I think, is an absolute necessity. I would not want to do this project without one of these.
The instructions for this LVP tell you a different way to lock the planks together, which is putting in a scrap to bridge 2 joints, then using a floor puller to slide the board to close the gap. There's little ramps built into the ends that let one board ride up over another before locking in. However, this method turns out to be a giant pain in the butt, because to keep the whole row from sliding while you hammer, you either need a spacer against the wall on every run or have someone stand on the board behind you. It was way easier and seemingly just as effective to engage the board on the long edge where it needed to be, then lay it down and tap the short edge with a mallet to lock it in.
I'm getting a little better at cutting out for these weird pieces around vents and corners and that kind of thing. Just going slow and systematically using scrap pieces to mark where I want this corner. Same process for getting the length. Stick the tongue in, which is gonna really snap into that side, but we got it flipped around here, sticking that underneath the cabinet around a 1/2 inch. Then I can mark back here where the pattern ends on my existing piece in the run. That's where I'm gonna make the cut in this guy. And that cut is gonna end up underneath the cabinet once it's flipped around correctly. And I got a bloody nose.
Not on your floor.
Not on her floor, she says. A moment of truth. Slide it in from this end. Beautiful. She fit. Update, we are almost done with the kitchen. There is literally one sliver left right there. And this is the weirdest piece I've cut so far because it's got to go around this door jamb in parallel with the door, which is not ideal. It would have been nice if this broke just a little bit further that way so it would have split the door, but it is what it is. Had to cut this H-looking piece out. I did make sure to stop this piece right here. We can pick where the joints are by varying the length of that first piece in this row. Putting it here minimizes the H on this end, so it should be easier to get this around the door jamb, but obviously this is not ideal. Luckily, as we go up the hallway, all the rest of the doors are perpendicular with the flooring. We never really talked about this in the beginning, but the direction of LVP we chose is actually non-traditional because we are not running it in the same direction as the hallway, the long direction of the hallway. Rather, we are going transverse from the hallway. I guess that's a bit of an engineering nerd word. Perpendicular to the hallway is a better way to put that because of the light coming in the room. The main sources of light are these doors and windows and this big window in the kitchen over here. So we wanted the flooring to follow the light and we weren't as worried about getting it aligned with the hallway. All right, how to get this thing in without breaking it. So that strip should go just underneath the cabinet. George, I need full focus right now. Do not need the barking. Hard part's gonna be getting this little sliver engaged. Thank you for all that. I appreciate all the barking. I appreciate the barking. Yeah. What'd you find? Big stretch? You found a big stretch? Big stretch. Oh, there's the biggest stretch. What'd you find? What'd you find? What'd you find? Oh, you found a big stretch. That's what you found. Trying to be a lap dog? Trying to be a lap dog? We got her. Shouldn't be any more like that, hopefully, except maybe the bedroom closet. The weird thing about putting the joint right here, although it made my life easier on this piece, I'm gonna have a little shard of a piece back in this corner, which is gonna be mostly covered with the baseboard, but it's still not ideal to have such a tiny little piece hanging on at the end there. Didn't get any film of the rest of the pantry, but it went really easily. I did have to start with another little strip, which you can't even hardly see over here against the wall, which should be almost totally covered by baseboard. Then it was just a few more rows until I got to the toe kick. I was not able to get it underneath this set of cabinets. I just could not get my slider bar underneath there with the flooring. So that one is basically just cut flush to the toe kick, and we will put on the finished toe kick, which will cover that joint. This is the first door opening that we came to that we are not running the flooring through. So I had to think a little bit about where I'm stopping the flooring within the threshold here, and I decided on the halfway point. This is the attic door, so it will actually be opening towards me because of the steep slope of that roof pitch in there. This is also going to be a weather tight door, so there's gonna be a piece of weather stripped threshold down there as well. I'm gonna be building this door and threshold custom, so I can basically set the door anywhere I want in the threshold, so I figured just doing it halfway in the middle of the jamb will give me enough options that I'll be just fine with that. While we're in the pantry, we should note our little setup we've got in here for a little friend. We might have to leave that bottom drawer out now that he's gotten used to this. And now we continue onwards. This row here actually marks the halfway point of the entire project. I only know that because there is a steel column in the center of the house that's right on the right side of this light switch. So we are on the halfway row. The rest should actually be a lot easier because we're done with all the cabinetry stuff. So from here on out, it's literally just this hallway, 2 bedrooms, and a closet, and the laundry nook. It's gonna be the same deal for this door going into the bathroom for where the tile stops and the LVP starts. We decided we're gonna stop the tile flush with the plane of the drywall there. I'm gonna leave a 3/4 inch gap and then I'll run the LVP to this line in here. Elena's thinking she wants to use a piece of transition molding that matches the LVP flooring, and that basically just has like a little ramp because the tile will be thicker, about twice the thickness actually, than the LVP. So we need a little bit of a ramp to bridge the gap between those two and leave a nice finished look.
As we've been installing the LVP, we're trying to stagger the joints. We want to avoid any stair stepping where the joints themselves make it look like a stair step. We used this same exact process when we did the vinyl siding on the side of the house. That turned out really nice. Those pieces were 12 foot long, which made it a little bit easier than these 6 foot pieces. Sometimes you'll think that you are not stair stepping and then you look back and you've stair stepped. But overall, the joints are turning out great and it looks like real hardwood.
Now that we've gotten a good start with the LVP, I want to talk about the tooling a little bit more. Now we have some decent practice using it. These were the only tools that we actually bought for the project. This is a pretty heavy tapping block. It's just basically a solid piece of machined plastic, wooden handle. Use it to tap the flooring into the adjacent piece without damaging the tongue. Using just like a hammer or something like that, you would easily smash the tongue up and then the next piece would be done. And then this is a flooring puller. It's basically just a black steel bar in an S shape. It's got some felt pads on one side. And then the business end here hooks onto the edge of the flooring and allows you to use a hammer when you're kind of right up against the wall, or even just locking the butt joints of the board together by pulling one board towards another. This is definitely an invaluable tool. I've used it a lot. I did make a modification to this one though. It came off Amazon and I'm pretty sure it was for like true hardwood flooring, which is 3/4 inch thick. So this tongue was really thick. I ground it down to about half the height and that works a lot better now. I can get it up underneath the drywall in some situations. Other than those, obviously a tape measure and knife for cutting. I had read about using these curved flooring blades in the utility knives here. Honestly, I didn't have great luck with them. The tips broke and they were more trouble than they're worth. Good old standard straight utility knife blade works just fine. I would not waste money on the curved blades. And then this is an extra large speed square. In our case, because we are using 9-inch panels, we needed a square that can go this far. So I already have this from framing, but using a small square would really be a pain because you're running the knife along this and you'd have to, flip the square over every time. So a square big enough to match your flooring size. And finally, these are not specifically just for this project. It's gonna be used a lot in tile too, but these knee pads that I'm standing on. So these are not cheap knee pads. They're called Pro Knee brand. And they are just a super thick cushion pad with a rigid frame that goes from basically your ankle to your knee. And what's nice about them is it really spreads the load all throughout your shin, not just on your knees like a regular set of knee pads would. So you can really kind of like sit on these things and you're comfortable for hours at a time. If you're doing a lot of flooring and tile, definitely would recommend protecting your knees and getting a good set of knee pads. So far, I really like these. Elena has a Duluth pair on. They're much less fancy, but she seems to like them nonetheless. Something else you'll see a lot in these LVP flooring toolkits are wall spacers, or really just shims that go between the drywall, or if you have baseboard already, they give you that 1/4 inch gap. We've really not been using them at all. We have a few shims that we've just been using to measure our gap and make sure we're good with clearance. But when it comes to holding these guys steady when we're knocking the next piece in and locking it in, we've just had one or the other of us standing on this piece to help it not slide and doing it that way. And if it does slide, we'll just take the floor puller and just pull it out a little bit at the end of the row. Haven't really bothered putting spacers in on the side walls so far, and that's been great for us. You saw our technique at the beginning, and that has been awesome with anchoring the whole floor going this way with knocking the boards into each other with the tapping block. Really like how that technique worked, and I wouldn't want to use spacers there either. If you're working by yourself though, the spacers would be pretty handy just to stick them in here. The hard part is not letting them pivot underneath the drywall if that drywall is sitting up off the subfloor. around a 1/2 inch like it should be. So some folks will put a piece of painter's tape on it. They actually have some other spacers, which I think would be probably better in this scenario, that are like real flat and there's like a dial on the top of it. So it's like an adjustable spacer, and that doesn't tend to like flip underneath the drywall. So if I were to invest in a set of spacers, I'd probably go with the dial ones. Another crucial measuring tool I've been using is this guy here. This is not anything special. It's just a regular old piece of scrap that got cut off some other piece. I haven't modified the edges or anything. And I've just been using this to mock up where the next board is going to sit. Like for example, I need to cut out this board for this vent. I'm just locking that little piece in, putting a mark where I want it, and then I can very easily transfer this onto a full-length piece. I don't need to muscle around a full-length piece to mock this up. There are plenty of instances where I do use the full-length piece to mark exactly where it needs to be cut, but other than that, I've just been using this scrap. One of the other techniques I've seen is called a cheater board, where you take the male end off this, and you can use that as kind of a scribing tool, one board over. It's kind of hard to explain without showing it, but I found that in my style of carpentry anyway, I don't really need that. I just need a piece of scrap that I can use to measure and mark and transfer over to my full piece. I didn't give the details on this little hammer here, but this is actually kind of a flooring mallet, or it's kind of a heavy, soft hammer. This is from Harbor Freight. I think it was like $5, but we use this on the deck too. And the yellow head especially does not leave any marks on anything, which is really nice. And I like that it's like solid steel and really heavy too. Good old Harbor Freight saving the day yet again. So I said I didn't use a cheater board earlier, but this is actually a situation to use them in. This is the first like long wall we've had to scribe to. I still haven't modified this at all, but I'm just putting the female groove edge underneath the drywall to give me my, I guess, 1/4 inch gap by the time I scribe this. So that's the same thing as just ripping off the female edge and then putting this right up against the wall. I'm just putting it underneath my drywall gap and then using this to scribe my last piece. I have my last piece sitting directly over top the second to last piece. You can also actually install this as if it's actual flooring and then uninstall it, but this is just as easy, I think, to just make sure you're directly over top and then run this thing along the edge. So it just accommodates for waves in the wall and unevenness. You'll see it really like at corners, especially. That one had kind of a bend out in the corner because of the drywall mud buildup in corners. In these straight sections, it's really just as good as the framing is, which this seems to be all right. We're taking off just about 1 inch, which is exactly what we planned for. If you remember all the way back when we were doing the laser tape measure stuff, we planned to take 1 inch off this last row, so it all worked out. After scribing that, now that I'm looking at it, it's basically completely straight all the way. If your walls are like really off, I think the cheater board is a good method, but this is what I've been using, honestly, for this, any kind of scribing, whether it be tracing around these guys or otherwise. Just my speed square with the scribe bar, either my big one or my small little trim one here. Well, I'll take a measurement for what I need here or mark it on my scrap piece, transfer that measurement, then find the appropriate scribe bar on my square and run this guy all the way along with my pencil. So for example, this one, it is literally right at 1 inch. I wasn't gonna trust the straightness of this wall, but what I could have also done is just take my 1 inch and take this all the way down with my speed square, and it would have yielded me the same result in this case because my wall is actually pretty square and straight. One montage later, and the bedroom and the closet are officially done. That was pretty easy because it was just all rectangle cuts and only one doorway to go through. The hardest part was actually starting off at this first board here because that wall was not perfectly parallel to our existing runs. So you can see there's like little jogs as the wall went outwards that we had to adjust. So for the next bedroom, I'm gonna do something a little different. Last night I did the boring and tedious job of sanding all the rest of the floor, the hallway and the back bedroom and the laundry nook. So that's finally done. We can move forward with that section of the house. Don't mind George, he's found the sun. That's his favorite place to stand, is in the sunlight. But as we're going into this next bedroom here, first of all, I got really lucky. I don't have to cut out around this board at all. It had the 1/4 inch gap that I needed, starting on a fresh new row. So that was convenient. But that means for this first row in this bedroom, I'm gonna have to rip it all the way down. So rather than trying to do some guess and check work, I assembled 2 rows here, and that ties back into our hallway right here. So we've kind of squared off the hallway by using the squareness of the planks because they are very precisely machined. And now I'm going to do the scribe method where I'm gonna run basically a full piece right up against the drywall with my pencil on the other side and run it all the way down. And that will allow me to mark these 2 boards at the end here. And I didn't do anything special to this piece whatsoever. I just kind of mocked it up and did a couple test measurements to see if I should be keeping the tongue up against the wall or how I should do it. And the consensus was yes, if I keep the gray exposed part against the wall and run my pencil along this side, and there is a little bit of gray on this side as well, that gives me the 1/4 inch gap that I need once everything's locked together. The nice part about this is it will give me the right side to cut off and everything. I didn't have to reverse the board like I typically do for end cuts. So just gotta cut along this line and I'll be good. Here's the final result of that. It turned out much better than the other room. Nice, even, consistent gap all the way down, right at a 1/4 inch. So that technique works well. If you ever need to take just a little bit off a piece of scrap to make it fit, you don't need a jigsaw, I found. You can still score it, but you need a hammer to tap it. And I put it right on the edge of my square to give me some leverage there. But it'll just break right off. It's just the same. And that piece was so small, it came in multiple chunks. So I'll have to come back and trim this up with the knife. But it does work. Just have to clean this up a little bit. Carve these chunks off. Yeah, there you go. Fast forward just a couple hours and we are done this room. Used the same scribe technique on that last row and everything else went in really nice and smoothly. This is a very simple, small, rectangular bedroom except for this cutout here, so nothing too crazy. And now for the very last boards on the floor. I just scribed these ones out. Again, similar technique, installed them as second to last row and scribed against the wall there around this little guy. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut those with the jigsaw. And we are approaching the end of the road for flooring. One note on the jigsaw, I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, but I've been using that exclusively for cutting. I haven't used my table saw after the first cut when I realized it's flinging plastic scraps back at you constantly and it's just really annoying. The jigsaw is the tool, as far as I'm concerned, for cutting this LVP, whether you're ripping down the whole entire length of the thing or cutting out for door jambs or HVAC registers, whatever. It does such a nice job and it's so easy and versatile to use that. It doesn't fling dust everywhere. The dust is really coarse and it just kind of falls down to the ground. So that is by far my tool of choice if I'm not using the score and snap method to cut this stuff. The really nice thing about this floating floor is that there's no fasteners, there's no glue, none of that stuff. That all slows you down when it comes time to installing it. As you might notice, I got my Turtle Deck construction shirt on, named for how slowly Elaine and I built our deck. And one of the main things that caused that was all the fasteners, everything had to be pre-drilled. Then you drive it in, then it's got to be color matched to a plug and then drive the plug in and repeat that about 500 times. And actually way more than that. I think I counted 500 just on the stairs. Those tasks just add up. All those little movements, changing out the right drill bit. Like at the end of the day, it just adds up a lot of work to the job. And this floating floor doesn't have that. Just give it a little taparoo with the tapping block. Let it fall in where it's supposed to be. Make sure we got good gaps. Little tap at the butt joint. That piece is in, it's done. Now we see how well my scribe worked out. Oh, this might be tight. This might be tight. Oh, I think I might get it though. Hard part is whether or not I can pivot this up enough to get the angle system to lock in. This piece of drywall got totally boogered up. I think they just were running out at the end here. We're really scrounging the bottom of the barrel. Some base trim should hold that paper back. See if I can get it started. These last pieces are always the hardest. Yeah, I'm catching on this guy right over here. I might need to trim that back. One small trim later, see if we can go. It's tough because these corners are not square. They have mud buildup on them. It's kind of like a trapezoid, not a rectangle. And I cut my flooring out square. So it's getting tight at the corners there. Aha, there we go. Nothing the little floor puller bar can't fix though. You don't need this tool that often, but when you do, it really comes in handy. Just at these end rows here. And of course, we have to record the very last piece of flooring. So stoked about this. Oh. And it doesn't fit. One last cut. Never mind, we wiggled it in there. Just barely. That's all she wrote for flooring. Almost. I say almost because of this area right here. If you remember back to our interior reframing video, we framed this little platform up here above the washing machines to reclaim some of that wasted space that would have been above our machines against this 10-foot ceiling here. So we have ourselves a little bit of a storage cubby, and I knew from the start that I wanted to use any flooring scraps to cover this up here where no one's gonna see them anyway if they're, you know, a matching pattern or really short pieces or something like that. And so that is what I'm gonna do, just a little bit more flooring to go. Speaking of leftovers, this is what I have left. It is currently 9 boxes, but probably gonna be about 8.5, maybe 8 by the time I'm done with that cubby. And these are 26 square foot each, so that is gonna be a little over 200 square foot of extra flooring. When I did the takeoff for this quite a while ago, I do remember I kept the cabinet square footage in the total just because I knew we'd be making a lot of cuts there. And then they also advised us to add a 10% extra for waste, which we don't have that much waste. I'll show you what we ended up with, but I think that is pretty much where all this excess came from. I can't remember how many boxes we ordered originally. I wanna say it was like 44 boxes. I knew we were gonna have some excess. I think what we're gonna do is just put this on Marketplace and sell it, maybe just for a slight discount for what we paid for it. Someone locally can pick it up for 1 or 2 rooms if they just wanna do a bedroom or something like that. Here's the final waste pile, really just some long skinny rips and then some short cutoff pieces that both ends got cut off and they couldn't be used anymore. So honestly, I think this is pretty good. I doubt this is even close to 100 square foot, which would have been the 10% waste allowance. These still have at least one tongue or groove on one end, so potentially if you had a narrow strip, you could use it. There is still one last thing to do to wrap up our floor install, and it has to do with these register covers. This is something that I did not learn until Nikki Kruger and her husband Chris came over last summer to do our duct blaster test, and we were talking about sealing around these register boots. There is a small but measurable amount of air that when it hits the back of this plate and it creates some back pressure there, it's actually forced back down into the floor platform around the gaps of this register boot to the subfloor if you don't have them sealed properly. So here's what I'm gonna do about it. Use up all of my 80 to 90% leftover tubes of Lexel. The stuff sticks to metal, sticks to wood, perfect application for this. And I have all these random tubes that have just appeared somehow. I feel like everyone's got their stash of like 90% through caulk tubes. And this to me seemed like a perfect application to actually use them. The beads don't have to look nice, it just has to get in there and seal. Trying to pump as much as I can in there. It's kind of hard to get it down in there.
My makeshift wooden spatula here.
I could see how all of these gaps across a whole system worth of registers really does make a notable difference. These duct systems are like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like it's really important to pay attention to the details, because if you let poor workmanship add up over an entire system, well, all of a sudden that thing is 15% less efficient, and you're gonna be feeling that throughout the whole rest of its installed lifetime. Of course, this stuff's always accessible, but all the main duct work for this is locked away under drywall and Sega and flooring and everything else, and it's probably never gonna get seen ever again. At least I hope it doesn't. But that's why it's all the more important to pay attention to those details. And we really took a lot of care in sealing that ductwork. Definitely paid off though. Well, that's a wrap on flooring. We are really liking it so far. We've dropped enough on it already that we can tell it's gonna be really durable. It does not scratch or dent easily at all. And most importantly, we really like how it looks, the color, how it reflects light. It looks like white oak flooring, honestly, which is pretty impressive that we've come that far in the flooring game, that you can really replicate it that closely. Of course, this little section back here is going to be our future media wall, so stay tuned for a whole nother little video series on that. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.